So welcome to Niagara Votes 2019. I'm Grant LaFleche from the St. Catharines Standard, and this is the first of our series of chats with the candidates for the St. Catharines riding for the upcoming federal election. And with me today for the first time is Dennis Van Meer from the New Democratic Party. Welcome
Grant,
to the Standard, sir.
Thanks for having me, Grant.
Before we dive into some policy questions, and there's a lot of them, but introduce yourself to our readers and our viewers. Who are you? Why are you running? A little bit about your background.
So my name is Dennis Van Meer, born and raised in St. Catharines. I'll be 55 years old next month. Raised two grown children in St. Catharines. Grew up in social housing in central St. Catharines as a child, raised by a single mother that raised four kids. So I know the dealings of dealing with affordable housing issues are something that are near and dear to me. From there, when I left home, I got a job at General Motors, worked at General Motors for about 10 years, lost my job there due to the first free trade agreement. And then since 1999, I've been working at Stelco in Hamilton. The last 5 years, the local vice president of the union, representing 10,000 pensioners and about 6 to 650 active workers.
And this is your second run for office. You ran municipally in the last municipal election.
Yeah, I ran municipally in Grantham Ward last October. It's almost a year to the date. I believe that election was October 22nd. This one's going to be October 21st. So I've kind of been in campaign mode for probably almost a year, which I think sometimes helps.
Yeah. And before we jump into some policy stuff, some of the commentary about the election since the English language debate has been that Jagmeet Singh had done exceptionally well. Certainly, he seemed to be the one in command of that particular evening. Have you seen any difference in terms of response to you as an NDP candidate since you've been campaigning after that debate? I mean, has that performance been something you've noticed on the ground when you're going door to door?
Yeah, it's a great question because there has been, I've been telling Canadians and I've been telling people in St. Catharines, I've been knocking on doors for approximately 5 months now, and I've been telling a lot of residents of St. Catharines that once they get to know Mr. Jagmeet Singh, they're going to be so impressed with him because he really is so down-to-earth, transparent, articulate, intelligent. And since the English language debate, or the leaders' debate, and the polls have spiked a bit for the NDP, which is fantastic, and I've been hearing it at the doors that people are really impressed with the way Mr. Singh has performed, and he actually has taken a lot of people by surprise, which is no surprise to myself. I knew that once Canadians got to know him, they were really going to resonate with him.
The one issue that came out of that debate, and it came up again during the French language debate, is Bill C-21 in Quebec. Mr. Singh has made it very clear as a very visible minority. He wears the fact that he's a Sikh on his sleeve, as it were. And he talked about how Bill C-21, is offensive. He said it hurts him. He understands how it's discriminatory to other Canadians who may be visible minorities. But at the same time, he said if the NDP either form a government or otherwise had the balance of power in the Commons, he wouldn't intervene or didn't want to intervene. And I think part of the question is, if the bill is wrong and discriminatory, why not simply confront it head on?
So I think his position is he's going to let the Quebec court system make a ruling first before there's any type of intervention, whether there's an appeal at the federal level. So let the Court of Appeals let the courts in Quebec deal with the issue first and see how that transpires. So then we'll take it from there. I think that's the position we've taken. If it's successful or unsuccessful in the Quebec Court of Law, that it'll be challenged or unchallenged.
What's your thought? I mean, if it passes through the Quebec courts, is a challenge even likely to be fruitful? Because I suppose the Quebec government could always invoke notwithstanding.
Right. So, and we know firsthand in Ontario with the powers of the notwithstanding clause with the recent Ford government. I don't know how the legal challenge would go. I guess I'll have to wait and see.
You mentioned off the hop that you had worked at GM for a long time, and then the impact of the past free trade agreement resulted in yourself and I imagine a number of your colleagues losing their jobs, and now you're doing it at Stelco. The new, yet to be ratified in the United States, free trade deal between Canada and the U.S., that was a major issue, not so much for this campaign so far, but it has been for about the last year and a half. What is your view of it? And I guess as somebody from the factory floor, as it were, do you think the deal that was negotiated with the United States is a good one? Is it one that Canada should sign on the dotted line or try to make changes to?
So currently it still hasn't been ratified, like you mentioned. It needs to be ratified. So once the House goes back and sits, I guess at some point in time, who's ever forming government is going to have to ratify this new NAFTA 2, USMCA, whatever you want to call it. Um, so something near and dear to me was the steel tariffs and the aluminum tariffs. And, as a steel worker, we lobbied hard in Ottawa to get the steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs removed. We were successful getting them removed. Unfortunately, at the way it stands right now, there is a quota type system still in place on steel and aluminum where the Americans could put the tariffs back. They call it a snapback provision. So it's something that we would like to see removed. So there are no snapback provisions, and there are no tariffs on steel and aluminum.
What was the impact like for you when the tariffs were in place? I mean, where was your workplace impacted by it in terms of your shifts or what your output, that kind of thing?
Yes and no. A lot. So the history of Stelco, we got taken over by an American hedge fund in 2017, and they're kind of, U.S. Steel owned us for 10 years prior to that. It was the worst 10 years of my life. But anyways, when U.S. Steel left and they filed for their bankruptcy, and then they finally left Canada, they took a lot of the orders with them. A lot of those were auto orders. Mm-hmm. So slowly but surely, the new owners are trying to get the orders back, but they've really been concentrating on Canadian orders. So the tariffs weren't really affecting us that much, because we did do a lot of American business, but U.S. Steel took a lot of those orders. So we were the Canadian orders. So they've been concentrating on the Canadian market too. So the tariffs were yes and no. They did affect us.
The quotas that you mentioned, and we'll move on just really quickly. So if Canadian steel production hits a certain quota, the Americans are allowed to put their tariffs back.
Right.
Does that will that impact how much steel that Canadian businesses can actually sell? Because you have to curb your production over a certain calendar year. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. The snapback provisions are going to be, it's going to be an added cost to Canadian steel manufacturers if the tariffs go back in place, which is a disadvantage to Canadian workers. And eventually it's going to affect, Stelco, Dofasco, all steel manufacturers.
You also said at the beginning that affordable housing is an issue that's close to you. You referenced, being raised by a single mom with, what was it, four brothers, did you say?
No, two sisters and a brother.
Two
so
sisters
four
and a
kids.
brother, so four of you in total. Affordable housing is one of these escalating issues in this country. Certainly in our community, it's a significant issue. A lot of that conversation has been based around what will the provincial government do or what levers does the municipal government do. What should Ottawa do from your point of view to alleviate that problem because of the rise in homelessness and the dramatic reduction of affordable housing in our market?
And I've been talking about affordable housing for a long time because really it is something that I've seen firsthand. I grew up in Northtown Court in St. Catharines, which is now called Old Pine Trail on Vine Street.
Yep.
I actually canvassed in there 2 weeks ago, went and knocked on all the doors in there, brought back a lot of memories. Unfortunately, we don't have enough of those social housing projects across this country and in St. Catharines. Had the Liberal government in 1993, I believe under Mr. Kretchen, stopped social housing funding at the federal level in 1993, his term was 93 to 03. So since then, all that federal funding for affordable housing and social housing stopped, and it was downloaded to provinces and municipalities that didn't have the resources to build those affordable housings in here. Had that funding continued in the last 25 years, I think the affordable housing crisis, I think we'd still have a bit of a housing crisis, but I don't think it would be nowhere near as bad as it is.
So what's the solution now?
The solution now is, so the NDP has a plan that we're going to invest billions in dollars and build 500,000 units of affordable housing all across Canada. That's a combination of co-op housing, social housing, seniors housing. And, I talked about it last night in a debate. You look at St. Catharines as a prime opportunity right now. We got 56 acres of vacant land in the heart of St. Catharines, the old General Motors site, that if developed properly, we could solve a lot of our problems in our own community. We could put a balance of affordable housing in, seniors housing in. We could keep some green space in there, some parks. St. Catharines is in desperate need of a permanent homeless shelter. So those are the type of things that I would like to see St. Catharines and the federal government having a role in, and hopefully sinking some money in and trying to help develop those lands in St. Catharines.
Is there a sense yet, from the NDP's point of view, as to how that housing would be distributed across the country?
No, not that I'm aware of. I think it's just 500,000 units, and obviously it would be open to debate with the municipalities how we're going to actually allocate where they're going to be built.
Climate change, been a giant issue for this campaign. Certainly, the Green Party and the Liberals have tried to make it the issue
Yep.
in many circumstances. And part of that debate revolves around the gas tax, and I wanted to get your thoughts here. There is a broad agreement amongst economists that a very efficient way to combat emissions and therefore affect climate change is through carbon pricing or gas taxing. But the caveat is that pricing or that gas tax has to be significant enough to impact consumer and industrial behavior. If it's too low, then it's not going to have enough of an impact. What is your view and what is the NDP's view on the federal gas tax? Is it high enough, or are there other measures that need to be taken in conjunction with it in order to have an actual measurable impact on emissions, which have continued to rise in this country?
So the carbon tax law, I'm not opposed to a carbon tax. I just don't like the way it's every dollar collected on the carbon tax right now. I believe 10% of it is going, every 10 cents is going to renewable energy, and 90 cents is going back to taxpayers. I believe when I did my income tax last year, I got $300 back as a carbon tax credit. I just don't think that carbon tax credit is giving the consumers the incentive to go green and buy green. We need incentives to where I drive my car down the street. I have no alternative but to put gas in my car as of now. If we invest in green energy and zero emission vehicles, at some point in time, that carbon tax, as a consumer, I'm going to have a choice. I could buy an electric car. Hopefully I'll have we want to take the federal sales tax off and produce zero emission vehicles right here in Canada. So that's something we're looking at. So I think the carbon tax, I think every penny of it should be invested in renewable green energy and invested into the economies that are actually going to lose jobs when we transition away from oil, such as the oil sands in Alberta. So if they're going to lose a bunch of jobs while we transition away from fossil fuels and we're going to stop fossil fuel subsidies, we need to invest in those economies that are going to lose those jobs and put green technology and green infrastructure in place to replace them with good green jobs.
Does the gas tax in particular, does it have to be higher? Does it have to be set at a higher rate, or that rebate be less in order to impact, as you say, to have them go green or buy green or invest in green?
I don't think it needs to be any higher. I think if you bring the revenue in from the carbon tax that we have now, I think if the revenue is distributed properly, I think it'll solve the problem.
There are two questions that have come in since I announced we were doing these
Yep.
chats with the candidates. So really quickly, your own personal view on these things, and I think the first answer is obvious, but I have to ask it anyway. You accept that human activity has been exacerbating climate change, making it worse.
100%.
And what is your view, your personal view on a woman's right to choose?
Well, that's a great question, and I've had it for. So I'm on record saying it that it's pretty simple. It's great that a man has an opinion. Unfortunately, the decision is entirely up to a woman and her healthcare professional, and that period.
As we come to the end of this chat, Dennis, why should voters consider casting their ballot for the NDP? I mean, even though we have a multi-party system, it's always come down to the Liberals or the Tories. The polling between the two leading parties is quite close. So from your point of view, is the NDP running to win a government, or are you winning? Are you trying to push to become the balance of power in a potential minority government situation?
Me personally in St. Catharines, I'm running to win. I'm not running to lose. Obviously, I wouldn't be spending all this time and energy to lose. If we form a minority government with us being the leadership, that's fantastic. If there's a minority government and we have some sort of balance of power with our seats, I think it's crystal clear that I think in a minority government, I think that's some of the best social programs we've ever got in this country. We're under a minority government. I think it keeps all. So if the NDP has the balance of power, it'll keep. We'll be able to keep the Conservatives and the Liberals and hold them to account, so they actually live up to what they're going to say instead of a bunch of broken election promises. We can actually hold their feet to the fire and actually get something accomplished. Because that's the beauty of a minority government, is to get something passed, you got to negotiate with all the parties. So it's a little bit of give and take. I think it keeps everybody a little bit more transparent.
Okay. Dennis, thank you so much for coming in today. We appreciate it. Good
Thanks,
luck on
man.
election night.
All right.
And we'll be talking to you again soon. I'm Grant LaFleche from the St. Catharines Standard. You're watching Niagara Votes 2019. And remember that on election night, come back to our website starting at 8 p.m. for our live election results show. Thank you very much.